The snow fell in soft whispers against Moira's face, each flake a cold kiss that barely registered through the searing pain radiating from her abdomen. Her fingers clawed at frozen earth and dead leaves, pulling her broken body forward another agonizing inch. Another foot. The trail of blood behind her painted the winter forest floor in viscous crimson, steam rising from the still warm liquid, where it melted through pristine snow. Keep moving, just keep moving. Her wolf whimpered somewhere deep inside, a broken shadow of what she'd once been. The creature that had bounded through these woods with joy, now cowered behind barriers of trauma and physical agony, unable even to offer the strength that might save them both. Moira's breath came in sharp, shallow gasps that sent fresh waves of pain through her ribs. Broken. At least 3 of them were broken, maybe more. And the wounds across her stomach, she couldn't think about those. Couldn't process what Marcus's claws had done when he'd finally stopped pretending there was anything left between them worth saving. The baby. Please, Moon Goddess, let the baby be okay. Her hand trembled as she pressed it against the swell of her belly, feeling for movement. For several heart-stopping seconds, there was nothing. Then, a flutter. Weak, but present. A sob tore from Moira's throat, part relief and part anguish. Her daughter was still fighting, still holding on despite everything. Unlike her mother, who could feel life draining away with each labored heartbeat. The ceremony grounds where Marcus had performed the rejection felt like miles behind her now, though Moira knew she couldn't have crawled more than a few hundred yards. Every member of Silvercrest Pack had watched as their alpha declared Moira unworthy, unfit, unfaithful. The lies had poured from his lips with practiced ease, while Sabrina stood at his side, her hand possessive on Marcus's arm, her smile victorious. "You're nothing," Marcus had snarled, his honey-colored eyes that had once looked at Moira with love, now flat and cold as river stones. "You never were. This bastard you're carrying isn't mine, and I won't raise another male's spawn." She tried to defend herself, tried to explain that she'd never been with anyone else, that the baby was his, that Sabrina was lying about everything. But Marcus's hand had closed around her throat, cutting off her words, cutting off her air. The pack had watched in silence as their alpha dragged his pregnant mate into the forest like discarded prey. What happened next existed in Moira's memory as fragments of horror. Marcus's claws extending, his rage transcending words, pain exploding across her body in waves that should have killed her instantly. She remembered his parting words before he'd left her bleeding in the snow. "Die here. Make it easy on everyone." So she'd crawled. Because dying wasn't easy. Because her daughter deserved better than to perish in frozen mud because her father was a monster and her mother too weak to protect her. Moira's vision swam, darkness creeping in from the edges. Her fingers scraped against a tree root, and she tried to pull herself over it, but her arms gave out. She collapsed face first into the snow, no longer able to feel the cold. That was bad. That meant her body was shutting down, conserving what little warmth remained for the vital organs that were also failing. The Oracle's words drifted through her fading consciousness like smoke. Old Meredith had pulled Moira aside 3 months ago, gripping her hand with surprising strength for someone so ancient, her milky eyes seeing something beyond the physical world. "The one who saves you from death's door will break every chain," she'd whispered urgently. "When the snow falls and blood freezes, when you've lost everything, that's when your true path begins. Hold on, child. Hold on until he finds you." Moira had thought it was just the ramblings of an old wolf losing her connection to reality. Meredith made prophecies constantly, most of them nonsense. But now, as darkness swallowed her whole and her heart struggled to continue its rhythm, Moira clung to those words like a lifeline. "Hold on. Someone's coming. Hold on." Her hand remained pressed against her belly, protecting her daughter even as consciousness slipped away. The snow continued falling, beginning to cover her broken body in a blanket of white. In the distance, a wolf howled. Not one of Marcus's pack, but something else. Something that made her wolf's ears prick up despite their shared weakness. The last thing Moira registered before the world went black was the vibration of footsteps through the frozen ground. Heavy, purposeful, running toward her with inhuman speed. And then, nothing. Forrest had been alive for 300 years, and in that time, he'd learned to trust his instincts. So when every nerve in his body suddenly screamed at him to run north toward his kingdom's border, he didn't question it. He simply shifted mid-stride and let his massive wolf form tear through the winter forest with predatory speed. He'd been patrolling alone, something his beta Cain constantly lectured him about, because sometimes the Alpha King needed solitude, needed to escape the weight of ruling the largest werewolf kingdom in North America, if only for a few hours. The Shadowpine territory stretched for hundreds of miles, and Forrest knew every inch of it intimately. These forests had watched him transform from a young wolf into something ancient and powerful, had absorbed his loneliness over centuries like rain into thirsty soil. But this feeling, this compulsion that seized his chest and wouldn't let go, was entirely new. His wolf pushed harder, muscles burning as he covered ground with leaping strides that would have seemed impossible to anyone unfamiliar with an Alpha King's capabilities. The border with Silvercrest territory approached rapidly, marked by ancient stone cairns that denoted the boundary between kingdoms. Forrest rarely ventured this far north. Marcus Silvercrest was a young alpha, arrogant and territorial, and Forrest had learned long ago to avoid unnecessary conflicts with insecure males. The scent hit him 50 yards out, and Forrest's wolf nearly stumbled. Blood. Not just blood, mate blood. The bond snapped into place with such force that Forrest shifted back to human form involuntarily, crashing to his knees in the snow as every cell in his body screamed at him to find her, protect her, save her. 3 centuries of waiting, of believing himself cursed or defective, of watching his friends and allies find their destined mates while he remained alone, it all shattered in that single moment of recognition. She's here. She's dying. Move. Forrest didn't bother shifting again. In human form, he ran faster than most wolves could sprint, his bare feet barely touching the ground as he followed the scent of blood and mate and something else, something sweet and innocent that made his heart clench. Pregnant, she's pregnant. He burst through a stand of snow-laden pines and saw her. She was small, impossibly small, nearly buried in snow that had begun to accumulate over her broken body. Dark hair fanned out around her head like a macabre halo, and the blood, there was so much blood, painted the ground in a radius that spoke of wounds no wolf should survive. Her hand was pressed against her swollen belly in a gesture so protective it made Forrest's throat tighten. He crossed the distance in less than a second, falling to his knees beside her and pressing his fingers against her throat. Her pulse was there, but barely, a weak, thready flutter that could stop at any moment. Her skin was ice cold, lips blue, chest barely rising with shallow breaths. "No," Forrest growled, his voice rough with command and desperation. "You don't get to die. Not now. Not when I finally found you." He gathered her carefully into his arms, mindful of injuries he could see and others he could only sense. Someone had done this to her. Someone had torn his mate apart and left her to freeze to death in the snow. The rage that filled Forrest was ancient and absolute, but he shoved it down ruthlessly. Revenge could wait. Saving her couldn't. Forrest pulled power from his wolf and pushed it into her through the bond, willing her heart to keep beating, her lungs to keep drawing air. Her eyelids fluttered, but didn't open. This close, he could see the delicate features beneath the blood and bruising. A heart-shaped face with high cheekbones, dark lashes against pale skin, lips that might be beautiful when they weren't blue with hypothermia. "Mine," his wolf snarled possessively. "Ours. Protect. Heal. Keep." "I've got you," Forrest murmured against her hair, standing with her cradled against his chest like she weighed nothing. "I've got you, mate. You're safe now. I promise you're safe." He started running, using every ounce of supernatural speed he possessed. His estate was 15 miles south, but Forrest covered the distance in minutes that blurred together into pure determination. The bond between them pulsed weakly, fragile as spider silk, and Forrest fed it every bit of strength he could spare. Hold on. Just hold on a little longer. Guards at his estate's northern gate saw him coming and immediately opened the massive iron barriers, their expressions shifting from surprise to horror as they registered the broken woman in their king's arms. "Get Alara!" Forrest roared, his voice carrying across the grounds with alpha command. "Now!" He didn't slow down, didn't stop to explain. His private residence loomed ahead, a sprawling stone mansion that had been his sanctuary for decades. Forrest kicked open the front door with enough force to crack the heavy wood and carried his mate straight to his personal quarters, to rooms no one else had been permitted to enter in over a century. The enormous bed dominated the space, covered in furs and soft fabrics Forrest had never cared about until this moment. He laid her down with infinite gentleness, his hands shaking as he pushed blood-soaked hair back from her face. "Don't you dare die," he whispered fiercely. "We haven't even met properly yet. You can't leave me now." Footsteps pounded up the stairs, and Alara burst through the door, her healer's bag already in hand. The older woman took one look at Moira's condition and her expression turned grim. "How long has she been like this?" Alara demanded, moving to the bedside and immediately beginning her assessment. "I don't know. Minutes. Hours." Forrest stepped back reluctantly, every instinct screaming at him to keep touching her, to maintain the physical connection. "She's my mate, Alara. Save her. Save them both." Alara's eyes widened briefly at the revelation, but she recovered quickly, her hands already glowing with healing magic as she placed them over Moira's abdomen. "The baby's still alive, but barely. And your mate." She paused, her expression troubled. "These injuries aren't from an accident, my king. Someone did this to her deliberately." The rage Forrest had suppressed earlier surged back with volcanic force. His eyes flashed gold, his wolf rising so close to the surface that his canines extended. "I know." "I'll need help," Alara said, her voice steady despite the alpha power radiating from Forrest in waves. "Call the others, every healer in the kingdom if necessary. We're going to be fighting for both lives all night." Forrest moved to the door, sending out a mental summons to every healer within his territory. But he didn't leave the room. Couldn't leave the room. The mate bond, new and tenuous as it was, felt like the only thing keeping Moira tethered to life. As more healers flooded into the chamber and began their desperate work, Forrest stood vigil at the bedside, his hand wrapped carefully around Moira's cold fingers. "Fight," he willed through the bond. "Fight for our baby. Fight for your life. Fight for us." The snow outside his windows continued to fall, blanketing the Shadowpine Kingdom in white. And in his bed, surrounded by magic and medicine and the unwavering determination of an alpha king who'd finally found his mate, Moira's heart continued to beat. Barely, but it beat. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of Forrest's private wing, casting golden light across the thick furs that covered Moira's bed. 3 weeks had passed since that night in the snow, 3 weeks of healing and silence and the careful dance of two wounded souls circling each other. Moira stood by the window, one hand pressed against the cool glass, the other resting on her belly where her daughter moved with increasing vigor. 7 months pregnant now, and the healers assured her that the baby had suffered no lasting damage from that terrible night. A miracle, Alara called it. Moira wasn't sure she believed in miracles anymore, but she believed in survival. The knock on her door was soft, exactly 3 raps, the same pattern Forrest used every morning. "Come in," she said, her voice still carrying the hoarseness that lingered from Marcus's hands around her throat. Forrest entered with a breakfast tray, moving with a grace that seemed impossible for someone so large. The Alpha King stood well over 6 feet, broad-shouldered and powerfully built, yet he made himself smaller somehow when he was near her, kept his movements slow and predictable, never approached too quickly or stood too close. "Good morning," he said, setting the tray on the small table by the fireplace. "Alara made those honey cakes you liked yesterday, and there's fresh cream for the tea." Moira turned from the window, managing a small smile that felt like progress. A week ago, she couldn't have smiled at all. Thank you. You don't have to bring my meals personally, you know. You're a king. You must have important things to do. Nothing more important than this. Forrest's honey-gold eyes met hers, and Moira felt the now familiar flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with the mate bond she was trying desperately not to acknowledge. How did you sleep? Better. A lie, but a kind one. The nightmares came every night. Marcus's face looming over her, his claws extended, the smell of her own blood thick in her nose. But Forrest didn't need to carry that burden. He'd done enough, saving her life, giving her sanctuary, asking for nothing in return. They ate breakfast together in companionable silence, sitting on opposite sides of the small table. This had become their ritual, morning meals where Forrest talked about inconsequential things. The deer he'd seen on his morning patrol, the new foals in the stables, the weather patterns that suggested an early spring. He never asked about her past, never pressured her to explain the scars that marked her body or the ones that marked her soul. There's a garden, Forrest said, as he poured more tea into her cup, careful not to let their fingers touch. They'd been so careful about that, about maintaining distance, despite the bond that pulled at them both. On the east side of the estate, it's beautiful this time of year, even with the snow. I thought perhaps you might like to walk there this afternoon. Fresh air would be good for you, for both of you. His eyes dropped briefly to her belly, and Moira saw something fierce and protective flash across his features before he schooled his expression back to neutral. I'd like that, she heard herself say. The gardens were indeed beautiful, a sprawling maze of winter-hardy plants and snow-covered sculptures that must have been spectacular in summer. Forrest walked beside her at a careful distance, his presence solid and reassuring without being overwhelming. Guards trailed them discreetly, shadows that Moira had learned to ignore. My mother planted most of these, Forrest said, gesturing to a section where dormant rose bushes waited for spring. She's been gone nearly 200 years, but I keep them maintained. It seems important somehow, to preserve something she loved. 200 years, Moira murmured. The span of time was incomprehensible. She was 24 years old. Forrest had been alive for 3 centuries. How could the mate bond have connected her to someone so impossibly ancient? Sometimes it feels like yesterday. Other times... Forrest trailed off, his expression distant. Other times it feels like I've been alone forever. The vulnerability in his voice made Moira's chest ache. She stopped walking, turning to face him fully. You're not alone now. No, he agreed softly. I'm not. They stood there in the snow-dusted garden, the distance between them charged with everything they weren't saying. Moira felt the pull of the mate bond like a physical thing, urging her closer, promising safety and belonging and an end to loneliness. But the bond had betrayed her before. She'd felt it snap into place with Marcus, had believed it meant forever, and look where that had led. I should rest, she said abruptly, stepping back. The baby. Of course. Forrest's disappointment was carefully hidden, but Moira felt it through the bond anyway. Let me walk you back. They had nearly reached the main house when voices drifted from an open window, pack members in one of the common rooms, their conversation carrying clearly through the cold air. I just don't understand what he sees in her, a female voice said, sharp with disdain. She's damaged goods, pregnant with another male's child, and she's so weak. What kind of Luna would she make? Maybe he just feels sorry for her, another voice replied. The king's always had a soft spot for strays. He'll probably keep her around until the baby's born, then send her on her way. Can you imagine? Our alpha king, saddled with a broken Omega? He could have anyone. Forrest's growl cut through the conversation like a blade. Moira felt him move before she saw it, his body placing itself between her and the window, his eyes blazing gold with alpha power. Inside, he commanded, his voice rough. Now. But Moira had already heard enough. The words burrowed under her skin like parasites, confirming every fear she'd been trying to suppress. Damaged goods, broken Omega, pregnant with another male's child. Everything they'd said was true, She didn't belong here, in this beautiful place with this powerful male who deserved so much better than someone as shattered as her. She fled. Her pregnant body didn't allow for running, but she moved as quickly as she could back to her room, Forrest's calls following her across the grounds. She made it inside and locked the door, sliding down against it as tears finally came, the first she'd allowed herself since waking in Forrest's bed 3 weeks ago. The knock came minutes later, firm but not aggressive. Moira, Forrest's voice carried through the heavy wood. Please open the door. Go away, she managed, hating how broken she sounded. I can't do that. A pause, then. Those wolves will be punished. What they said was, true, Moira interrupted. It was all true. I am damaged. I am carrying another male's child. You could have anyone, and instead you're stuck with me because of a bond neither of us chose. Silence stretched for so long that Moira thought he'd left. Then, the bond chose well, Forrest said quietly. And if you'd open this door and look at me, you'd see that I've never felt stuck. Not once, not for a single moment since I found you. You don't know me, you don't know so let me know you. His palm pressed against the door. Moira could feel it like heat against her back. I'll wait as long as it takes. Years, if that's what you need. Just don't shut me out completely, please. The raw honesty in his voice broke something loose in Moira's chest. She turned, pressing her own palm against the door where his rested on the other side. The mate bond hummed between them, stronger than it had been, fed by this moment of vulnerability. She opened the door. Forrest stood in the hallway, his expression open and aching, and Moira realized with sudden clarity that she wasn't the only one who was broken. This male who'd lived for 3 centuries, who commanded the largest werewolf kingdom in North America, who could have anything he wanted. He'd been alone all that time, watching others find their mates, believing himself cursed or defective, and then finding her, a pregnant, traumatized Omega who flinched at shadows. I'm afraid, she whispered. So am I, Forrest admitted, but maybe we can be afraid together. 2 days later, the smell hit Moira like a physical blow. She was in the library, one of the few places she felt truly comfortable, surrounded by books that couldn't hurt her. The afternoon sun painted warm squares across the carpet, and she'd been reading peacefully for an hour when it happened. Pine and musk, and something distinctly male. Marcus. The book fell from her hands. Her breath came in short, sharp gasps that didn't bring enough air. The room spun, walls closing in as panic seized her throat with the same iron grip Marcus's hand had used. She was back in the snow, bleeding, dying, his face above her twisted with rage and disgust. Moira! Forrest's voice cut through the panic, and then his arms were around her, careful and solid and real. He pulled her against his chest, one hand cradling the back of her head, the other spread protectively across her back. Breathe with me, he commanded softly. In, out, in, out. That's it. You're safe. I've got you. Moira clutched at his shirt, fighting to match her breathing to his, using his steadiness as an anchor. Slowly, incrementally, the panic receded enough for rational thought to return. He's here, she gasped. I can smell him. Marcus is here. Forrest's entire body went rigid, his wolf rising so close to the surface that she felt his power crackling against her skin. When he spoke, his voice carried alpha command that made her bones vibrate. Beta Cain! The second in command appeared in the doorway within seconds, his expression grim. They're at the northern border, my king. Alpha Marcus Silvercrest and approximately 20 wolves. They're demanding an audience. Demanding, Forrest repeated, the word a low growl. His arms tightened around Moira. How bold of him, to come to my territory and make demands. He's claiming rights under old werewolf law, Cain continued. Says she's still his mate, still belongs to his pack, and that you're harboring her illegally. The child too, once it's born. Moira made a small, wounded sound. Forrest's hand moved to cup her face, tilting it up so she had to meet his eyes. Listen to me, he said fiercely. That male has no rights to you, none. The moment he tried to kill you, any bond between you was severed, by his choice, not yours. And this child? His other hand moved to rest gently on her belly. This child is under my protection. You're both under my protection. Do you understand? The law. I am the law, Forrest interrupted, his alpha power rolling through the room like thunder. I am the oldest living alpha, king of the largest territory, and I say you are mine, my mate, my responsibility, mine to protect. The possessiveness in his voice should have frightened her. Instead, Moira felt something warm and safe unfurl in her chest. I have to face him, she said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. I can't hide here forever. You don't have to do anything, Forrest countered. I can send him away. I can end this with one word. No. Moira straightened, pulling strength from somewhere deep inside, from the place where her wolf still cowered but hadn't disappeared entirely. I need to see him. I need to look him in the face and show him that I survived. Pride flickered across Forrest's features. Then we'll face him together. But Moira, if he so much as looks at you wrong, I'll tear his throat out. King or not, there are lines that can't be crossed. They walked to the northern border together, Forrest at her side and Beta Kane with 20 guards trailing behind. The afternoon was crisp and cold, snow crunching under their feet, and Moira focused on putting one foot in front of the other, on breathing, on not letting the panic win. Marcus waited on the other side of the border markers, and seeing him again sent ice through Moira's veins. He looked exactly as she remembered, tall and handsome, with honey-colored eyes and auburn hair, his build strong and his stance confident. Behind him stood his wolves, and among them, Sabrina, the female who'd stolen her life. Sabrina was beautiful in a way Moira had never been, with golden hair and a lithe, powerful build. She pressed close to Marcus's side, her hand possessive on his arm, her expression triumphant, as her eyes landed on Moira's pregnant belly. Moira, Marcus said, his voice carrying across the snowy distance. You look well, better than I expected, considering. Considering he'd left her to die. The unspoken words hung between them like poison. Forrest stepped slightly in front of Moira, his body language pure alpha dominance. You have 30 seconds to state your business and leave my territory, Silvercrest. Choose your words carefully. Marcus's eyes narrowed. That's my mate you're protecting. My child she carries. Under old law, you have no right to keep them from me. Your mate! Forrest's laugh was cold and sharp. You rejected her. You tried to kill her. What part of that suggests she's still yours? The rejection wasn't completed, Marcus said, and Moira's stomach dropped. The ceremony was interrupted before the final words. The bond may be damaged, but it's not severed. She's still mine by law. Sabrina smiled, and Moira suddenly understood. This had been planned. Marcus's attack, stopping just short of completing the rejection, leaving her alive, but taking everything. It had all been carefully orchestrated. Why? The word tore from Moira's throat before she could stop it. Why do this? You made it clear you don't want me. I don't, Marcus agreed easily. But I do want that child. Do you know what bloodline you carry, Moira? What flows through your veins? Moira shook her head, confused. She's moon-blessed, Sabrina said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. The bloodline that was supposed to be extinct. Do you know what a child with that blood is worth? What power they'll possess? Power that will belong to Silvercrest Pack, Marcus finished. So here's my offer, King Forrest. Return my mate and the child she carries, and I'll leave peacefully. Refuse, and I'll invoke the right of challenge. I'll bring every pack that honors the old laws down on your territory until you surrender what's mine. Forrest's power exploded outward like a shockwave so intense that several of Marcus's wolves stumbled backward. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of 3 centuries of authority. The child is hers. The choice is hers. And if you think I'd surrender my mate to a male who left her bleeding in the snow, you're even more foolish than I thought. He took a step forward, and even from the other side of the border, Marcus flinched. Go back to your territory, boy. Before I forget that killing visiting alphas tends to complicate politics. This isn't over, Marcus snarled. I will have what's mine, by law or by force. Try, Forrest invited. Please, give me a reason. Marcus's eyes shifted to Moira, and the hatred there made her step closer to Forrest instinctively. You should have died in the snow. It would have been kinder, because now? He smiled, cruel and cold. Now you'll lose everything twice. Then he was gone, his pack flowing back into the trees like shadows. Moira's legs gave out. Forrest caught her before she hit the ground, scooping her up against his chest and carrying her back toward the estate. Moon-blessed? She whispered against his shoulder. What does that mean? It means you're more than he deserves, Forrest said fiercely. And it means we need to talk about who you are, about what comes next. But first, he looked down at her, his expression softening. First, I need you to understand something. I meant what I said. You're mine, Moira, my mate, my responsibility, and I protect what's mine with everything I am. Later, when the panic had faded and Alara had checked both her and the baby, Moira stood on the balcony outside her room, unable to sleep. The moon hung full and heavy in the sky, painting the snow-covered forest in silver light. She heard Forrest before she saw him, his footsteps deliberate so he wouldn't startle her. I thought you might be here, he said, coming to stand beside her at the railing. The full moon makes it hard to sleep sometimes. Tell me about the moon blessed, Moira said quietly. Tell me what I am. Forrest was silent for a long moment, his profile stark against the moonlight. Finally, he said, 300 years ago, there was a bloodline of wolves who were different. They were immune to silver, resistant to dark magic, and their children were born with power that took others decades to develop. They were protectors, warriors, guardians of our kind. He paused. And they were hunted to extinction because others feared their power. But I'm not dead, Moira said. Obviously. Obviously. A small smile touched Forrest's lips. Which means someone in your line survived, hid, blended in. And now here you are, carrying a child with that blood, and males like Marcus who'd use that power for their own gain. He'll never stop, Moira said, the certainty settling in her bones. He'll keep coming until he has the baby, or we're both dead. Then I'll keep stopping him. Forrest turned to face her fully, and the intensity in his eyes stole her breath. I've been alive for 300 years, Moira. I've fought in wars that would terrify modern wolves. I've built kingdoms and torn them down, and in all that time, I've never wanted anything the way I want to keep you safe. You barely know me, she whispered. Then let me know you. He echoed his words from 2 days ago. Start now. Tell me who you were before him, before all of this. So Moira did. Standing under the full moon with the Alpha King beside her, she finally spoke the words she'd been holding inside for weeks. I was happy once, she began. I had a small house on the edge of Silvercrest territory. I taught the pack children to read. I loved the sound of rain on the roof and the smell of bread baking. And when Marcus found me, when the mate bond snapped into place, I thought I'd found my forever. Her voice cracked, but she pushed forward. He was gentle at first, attentive. He'd bring me flowers from the forest and hold me like I was precious. Then Sabrina came back. She'd been gone for years, training with some pack in the south. She was his childhood friend, and I didn't think anything of it, until I noticed the way she looked at him, the way she touched him. Forrest's hand found hers on the railing, their fingers intertwining. The touch sent electricity up her arm, the mate bond singing, but Moira barely noticed. The words were pouring out now, unstoppable. She told him I was unfaithful, that the baby wasn't his, that she'd seen me with another male. None of it was true, but he believed her. He believed her over me, his mate. Tears tracked down Moira's cheeks, but her voice stayed steady. The rejection ceremony was supposed to be clean, quick, just words that would break the bond. But then he looked at me, really looked at me, and I saw that he wanted me dead. wanted to erase me completely. Moira. He dragged me into the woods, she continued, needing to finish, needing Forrest to understand exactly what kind of male they were facing. He told me I was nothing, that my child was nothing. And then She touched her stomach, where the scars from Marcus's claws still showed faint and pink against her skin. He told me to die there, to make it easy on everyone. Forrest pulled her against his chest, his arms wrapping around her with infinite care. She felt wetness on the top of her head and realized with shock that the Alpha King was crying. "I'm sorry," he said roughly. "I'm sorry I wasn't there sooner. I'm sorry you had to go through that alone." "But I didn't die alone," Moira said, tilting her head back to meet his eyes. "You found me. You saved me. The Oracle's prophecy, the one who saves you from death's door, will break every chain. It was about you." "Then let me break them all," Forrest said fiercely. "Every chain he put on you, every lie he made you believe. Let me show you what a mate is supposed to be." The space between them disappeared as Forrest lowered his head, giving her every opportunity to pull away. But Moira didn't pull away. She rose on her toes, pregnant belly pressed between them, and met him halfway. The kiss was gentle, reverent, nothing like the claiming kisses she'd shared with Marcus. Forrest kissed her like she was precious, like she was something to be treasured, and Moira felt 3 weeks of careful distance finally bridge. The mate bond flared brilliant and warm between them, and for the first time since waking in his bed, Moira leaned into it instead of pulling away. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Forrest rested his forehead against hers. "Your daughter's kicking," he said with wonder, his hand spread across her belly where the baby had indeed started moving. "She knows her mother is happy." "How do you know it's a girl?" Moira asked, smiling despite everything. "Just a feeling." Forrest's eyes met hers, and in them, Moira saw 3 centuries of loneliness finally ending. "A very strong feeling that I'm about to become the father of the most protected princess in werewolf history." They stood together on the balcony as the moon climbed higher, 2 damaged souls beginning to heal in each other's presence. Moira knew that Marcus's threat still loomed, that danger waited in the shadows, but for this moment, wrapped in Forrest's arms with their baby moving between them, she let herself feel something she hadn't felt in months. Hope. Hope that she might survive this. Hope that her daughter would know a father who treasured her instead of one who saw her only as a tool. Hope that the mate bond, which had betrayed her so completely with Marcus, might actually mean something real with Forrest. "Thank you," she whispered against his chest. "For what?" "For finding me, for not giving up on me, for being patient when I was too broken to trust." Forrest's arms tightened around her. "I'd wait forever if that's what you needed, but I'm glad I don't have to." They stayed there until the moon reached its zenith, and when Forrest finally walked her back to her room, Moira didn't lock the door behind her. It was a small thing, that unlocked door, but it felt like the first step toward something new. She fell asleep with her hand on her belly and the memory of Forrest's kiss on her lips, unaware that 3 territories away, Marcus was already planning his next move. Unaware that in 5 days, during a routine medical appointment, everything would go terribly wrong. But for tonight, beneath the full moon with the mate bond warm and strong in her chest, Moira let herself rest. And for the first time in months, the nightmares didn't come. The mate bond stretched across the distance like a thread of burning steel, and through it, Moira felt Forrest's rage. She huddled in the corner of the abandoned ceremony grounds where Marcus had first rejected her, silver chains wrapped around her wrists, despite the fact they should have burned through to bone by now. Instead, they merely pressed cold against her skin, uncomfortable but not agonizing. Marcus had stared at her wrists for a long time when his wolves had first chained her, his expression shifting between confusion and something that looked almost like greed. "Moonblessed," she thought, the words still foreign in her mind. "I'm moonblessed, and that's why the silver doesn't hurt." The realization should have filled her with wonder. Instead, it just made her more valuable, more of a target, more of a prize to be claimed and controlled. Her hand pressed against her belly, feeling her daughter move with agitated kicks. 7.5 months now, and the baby seemed to sense her mother's distress. "I'm sorry," Moira thought toward the life inside her. "I'm so sorry I couldn't keep you safe." But then, warmth. A surge of emotion that wasn't hers flooded through the mate bond, and Moira gasped as Forrest's presence filled her mind. Not words exactly, but feeling, love, determination, a promise that resonated in her bones. "I'm coming. Hold on, I'm coming." Tears tracked down Moira's cheeks, but they weren't tears of despair anymore. Forrest was coming. The Alpha King was coming for her, and Moon Goddess help anyone who stood in his way. Footsteps crunched through dead leaves outside the crumbling structure. Moira's wolf, which had been cowering since the abduction, suddenly lifted its head. Something was different. Something had shifted in the hours since Marcus's wolves had dragged her here. Marcus entered with 4 guards, his expression cold and calculating. "Time to move you somewhere more secure. The Alpha King is mobilizing his forces, and I'd rather not have you here when he arrives." "He'll find me," Moira said, surprised by the steadiness in her voice. "Wherever you take me, he'll find me." "Perhaps." Marcus crouched in front of her, close enough that she could smell pine and musk, a scent that had once meant safety and now only triggered nausea. "But by then, you'll have served your purpose. That child you're carrying? Once it's born, I won't need you anymore. Sabrina's already made it clear she's willing to raise it as her own." Ice flooded Moira's veins. "You can't." "I can do whatever I want," Marcus interrupted. "You're nothing, Moira. You always were. The only valuable thing about you is the bloodline you didn't even know you carried." He reached for the chains, preparing to unlock them and move her. "Now get up. Power exploded through Moira's body like lightning. It started in her chest, where the mate bond connected her to Forrest, then spread outward in waves of pure energy. Her wolf surged forward with a strength that had nothing to do with physical power and everything to do with something ancient waking in her blood. The silver chains, which should have held any normal wolf, snapped like thread. Marcus stumbled backward, shock replacing calculation on his face. "What?" Moira rose to her feet, and for the first time since he'd tried to kill her, she looked at Marcus without fear. Her hands glowed with soft silver light, the same color as the full moon, and when she spoke, her voice carried power that made the guards behind Marcus whimper. "You don't get to hurt me anymore," she said. "You don't get to take my daughter, and you don't get to win." She didn't know how to fight, had never trained in combat, had spent her life teaching children to read and baking bread and living quietly, but her wolf knew, her blood knew. Centuries of moon-blessed warriors who'd protected their kind flowed through her veins, and instinct took over where training should have been. Marcus lunged at her, claws extended, but Moira's hand came up and pure moonlight shot from her palm. It caught him square in the chest and sent him flying backward into 2 of his guards. The other 2 charged, and Moira spun, clumsy, uncoordinated, but backed by power that made up for lack of skill. Her glowing hand raked across one guard's face, and he screamed, falling back with silver burns that looked like they'd never heal. The other got close enough to grab her arm, but the moment his skin touched hers, light flared and he jerked away with a howl of pain. "Get her!" Marcus roared, climbing to his feet. "She's still pregnant, she can't—" But Moira was already moving, her pregnant body awkward but her determination absolute. She couldn't escape, not with wolves surrounding the building and her belly making speed impossible, but she could make them work for every inch. Could prove she wasn't the broken woman they thought she was. She made it to the cellar door, the same cellar where Marcus had dragged her on that terrible night months ago. Her hands touched the stone doorframe, and something in her blood recognized it. Recognized the ancient magic that had been worked into the foundations of this place centuries ago by wolves who'd known what was coming. Sanctuary, her instincts whispered. Protection. Moira threw herself inside and slammed the heavy door behind her. A wooden bar fell into place, and her glowing hands moved of their own accord, tracing symbols on the stone that she'd never learned but somehow knew. Runes of protection, wards against dark intent, magic that had been sleeping in her bloodline for generations, waiting for someone to need it desperately enough to awaken it. The symbols flared bright silver and then sank into the stone, leaving faint traces that pulsed with protective energy. Marcus's body hit the door seconds later, but it held. His claws scratched against ancient wood that had been reinforced with magic, and his snarls of frustration echoed through the small space. "You can't stay in there forever," he roared. "Eventually you'll have to come out, and when you do—" "By then, Forrest will be here," Moira called back, sliding down the door to sit with her back against it. Her hands still glowed faintly, and her daughter kicked hard against her ribs as if celebrating. "And then you'll understand what it means to face an Alpha King." Through the mate bond, she felt Forrest's wolf howl in triumph. He'd felt her power awaken, felt her fighting back, and that knowledge was fueling him across the distance, driving him faster toward her. Moira closed her eyes and sent everything she had through the bond, love and determination, and the fierce promise that she would protect their daughter until her last breath. Forrest's response was immediate and overwhelming, pride and love so intense it made her chest ache, wrapped around a core of such absolute certainty that she finally understood what it meant to have a true mate. Marcus could pound on the door all he wanted. Moira would wait for her king. Forrest's forces moved through the night like a storm made flesh. 200 wolves ran beside and behind him, the largest mobilization Shadowpine had seen in decades. Beta Cain matched his pace, and behind them came warriors from 3 allied territories who'd answered Forrest's call without question. The Alpha King rarely invoked old debts, but when he did, wolves came running. "We'll reach Silvercrest by dawn," Cain reported. His breathing barely labored, despite the brutal pace they'd maintained for hours. "Scouts report that Marcus has pulled most of his forces back to the main compound. He's preparing for a siege." "He should be preparing for a massacre," Forrest growled, his wolf so close to the surface that his eyes remained pure gold even in human form. "If he's hurt her, if he's so much as frightened her—" "He has frightened her," Cain interrupted gently. "But she's also fighting back. Whatever happened earlier, that surge of power we all felt, that was her, wasn't it? Your mate is awakening." Forrest had felt it like a supernova through the bond. One moment, Moira had been afraid and trapped. The next, power unlike anything he'd experienced had flooded their connection, ancient and pure and absolutely devastating. Moon-blessed magic, responding to a threat against both Moira and her child. She broke free, he thought with fierce pride. She found her strength. Now, through the bond, he could feel her waiting. Barricaded somewhere, surrounded by enemies, but no longer broken. No longer the terrified woman who'd crawled through snow leaving a trail of blood. Moira had found her power, and she was using it to protect their daughter until he could reach them. The thought of that child, not his blood, but his in every way that mattered, sent another wave of determination through Forrest's body. He would be this baby's father, would teach her to be strong and fierce like her mother, would show her that not all males were monsters like Marcus. "There," Cain said, pointing ahead to where trees thinned. "Silvercrest border." They crossed without slowing, and alarms immediately began sounding throughout Marcus's territory. Wolves appeared from the shadows, forming defensive lines, but they took one look at the force Forrest had brought, and most of them backed away. Some even bowed their heads in submission to the Alpha King's authority. Smart wolves, Forrest thought. The ones who stood their ground were loyal to Marcus, or foolish, or both. "Stand down," Forrest commanded, his voice carrying alpha power that made even Cain flinch. "I have no quarrel with Silvercrest Pack, only with your alpha who dared to harm my mate. Stand aside and you'll live to see tomorrow." More wolves melted away, but a core group of perhaps 40 remained, teeth bared, eyes glowing with the fervor of wolves who'd follow their alpha into certain death. "So be it," Forrest said quietly. He shifted. The transformation was instantaneous. 3 centuries of power condensing into a wolf form that dwarfed even the largest alpha. Black fur, gold eyes, and a presence that made the very air tremble. This was what an alpha king looked like when you threatened his mate, a living embodiment of ancient fury that predated modern werewolf society by millennia. The battle that followed was brutal and decisive. Forrest tore through defensive lines like they were made of paper, his jaws crushing bone, his claws opening throats. Behind him, his warriors engaged Marcus's loyal wolves, but Forrest barely noticed. His entire focus was on the mate bond pulling him forward, on the connection that sang with Moira's presence growing stronger with every leap. He found Marcus in the center of the compound, shifted into a large auburn wolf that was powerful by normal standards, but looked like a pup next to Forrest. They circled each other while chaos raged around them, and Forrest let every ounce of his rage show in his gold eyes. "You tried to kill her," his growl seemed to say. "You left your pregnant mate to die in the snow, and now you'll pay." Marcus attacked first, desperate and vicious, but Forrest had been fighting before this wolf's great-great-grandparents were born. He sidestepped the lunge easily, and his jaws closed around Marcus's shoulder, crushing down until bone cracked. Marcus howled and twisted free, blood staining his auburn fur, but there was nowhere to run. They fought across the compound, 2 alphas locked in combat that could only end one way. Marcus was younger, slightly faster, but Forrest was stronger, more experienced, and absolutely merciless. Every time Marcus landed a hit, Forrest retaliated with 3. Every time Marcus tried to use pack tactics, Forrest's centuries of battle knowledge countered effortlessly. Through it all, the mate bond pulsed between Forrest and Moira. He felt her awareness of the fight, felt her sending strength through their connection, even as she held her own position against whatever threatened her. They were fighting as one despite the physical distance, and the sensation was intoxicating. Then Forrest felt it. A spike of alarm from Moira, followed by power surging through the bond. Someone was with her. Someone had found her hiding place. Sabrina, Forrest realized with cold fury. The female who'd orchestrated all of this. Marcus must have felt his momentary distraction because the auburn wolf lunged desperately at Forrest's throat. But Forrest was already moving, his massive jaws closing around Marcus's neck and bearing him to the ground. They landed in the snow, Forrest's weight crushing Marcus down, his teeth piercing through fur and skin and muscle until he tasted blood. "Yield," he commanded through the grip he had on Marcus's throat. "Yield and live." But Marcus thrashed harder, choosing death over submission. So Forrest gave it to him. The crunch of Marcus's spine breaking echoed across the sudden silence of the compound. Forrest held on a moment longer, making sure, then released the body and shifted back to human form. Blood covered his mouth and chest, and his eyes remained pure gold as he surveyed the carnage. "It's over," he called out to the remaining Silvercrest wolves. "Your alpha is dead. Anyone who stands between me and my mate will join him." They scattered like leaves in wind. Moira felt Marcus die through the incomplete bond they still shared. The sensation was strange, not grief, exactly, but an absence where something had been pulling at her for years. Freedom. Then Sabrina's voice cut through her thoughts, sweet and poisonous from beyond the cellar door. "Are you feeling it, Moira? Your precious Marcus is gone, which means there's no one left to stop me from taking what should have been mine." The door began to glow red with heat. Sabrina was using fire magic, something she must have learned in her years away, slowly burning through the protective wards Moira had placed. Moira struggled to her feet, her hands glowing silver again as power rose to meet the threat. Through the bond, she felt Forrest running toward her, but he was still minutes away. Too far. She'd have to face Sabrina alone. The door finally gave way with a crack of splitting wood. Sabrina stood in the doorway, beautiful and terrible, her hands wreathed in flames. "Hello, Moira. Ready to give up now? Ready to accept that you were never strong enough for this life?" "No," Moira said simply. "I'm ready to show you what moon-blessed power really means." She released everything she'd been holding back, every ounce of the magic that had awakened in her blood. Silver light exploded from her body, so bright that Sabrina stumbled backward with a cry. The flames around her hands flickered and died, overwhelmed by lunar power that predated fire magic by millennia. Moira advanced, her pregnant belly between them, her hands radiating light that seemed to come from the moon itself. You took everything from me, my mate, my pack, my home. You made me believe I was nothing. You are nothing, Sabrina snarled, trying desperately to reignite her flames. No, Moira said. I'm Moon Blessed. I'm the mate of the Alpha King. I'm a mother protecting her daughter, and I'm so much more than you'll ever be. She touched Sabrina's chest, and the silver light poured into the other woman. Sabrina screamed, a sound of pure anguish, as Moira's power found her wolf and ripped it away. Not killing, which would have been kinder, but stripping, removing the wolf from the woman, leaving her hollow and human and utterly broken. The magic knew how to do it instinctively, centuries of moon-blessed power that had punished those who'd harmed the innocent. Sabrina collapsed, alive but destroyed in every way that mattered to their kind. Then Forrest was there, crashing through the ruined doorway and pulling Moira into his arms. They were both covered in blood, his from battle, hers from where she'd scraped her hands on stone. But neither cared. The mate bond sang between them, fierce and triumphant and whole. It's over, Forrest murmured against her hair. You're safe. You're both safe. Moira buried her face in his chest and finally let herself cry, not from fear or pain, but from relief so overwhelming it threatened to drown her. I fought, she gasped. I fought back. I found my power and I fought. I know. Forrest pulled back just enough to cup her face in his hands, his thumbs wiping away tears. I felt it. Every moment. You were magnificent. Around them, Beta Kane was organizing the aftermath, but Forrest and Moira stood in their own world, the mate bond wrapping them in warmth despite the cold dawn air. Marcus was dead. Sabrina was broken. And they had survived. Together they walked out of the cellar that had held so much pain, into the sunrise that painted the snow gold and pink. Moira's hand rested on her belly, feeling her daughter's strong kicks, and for the first time since this nightmare began, she let herself believe in happy endings. Take me home, she whispered to Forrest. Always, he promised. And they did.